Hey everyone, had an incredible conversation with a lady called Nell Watson, who has just written a book called Taming the Machine, Ethically Harnessing the Power of AI. So we're going to hear all about that. We discuss AI, we discuss AI-only companies, we discuss AI agents being leaders and humans reporting to them, and how AI and humans can work together. And
in the longer term, within say 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the emergence of AI-driven corporations.
Really interesting conversation. She is an advisor at Apple. She's the president of the European Responsible Artificial Intelligence Office, and a whole host of other things.
To a large extent, knowledge is becoming cheap, right? Because language models can teach us anything that we need to know.
And we go deep into AI and what that might mean for us humans as we look to continue to develop our career and to think about what our place is going to be in this world. Hope you enjoy it. I've been really excited to do this because I obviously love the topic, and I think the last 6-7 months, certainly for us, and I run a global exec search firm, so I'm kind of like quite involved in all of this stuff. We've been using it more and more, just ourselves, and I say it, I'm meaning like AI and the different models and things that go on. So excited to chat with you. Just by way of intro, and if I've missed anything, please add to it. But I'm going to give you a little intro. And so Eleanor is your full name. I believe you'd like to be called Nell.
Sure, I usually go by Nell professionally.
No,
sure.
Fine. Trailblazer in emerging technologies such as machine vision, which I'd love to find out about, and AI, ethics. You dedicate your work to protecting human rights and infusing ethics, safety, and values that elevate the human spirit into technologies like AI. Love that. You are doing lots of different things, I see. So you're chairing a few committees for the IEEE Standards Association, president of the European Responsible Artificial Intelligence Office, consultant to Apple, which looks really interesting, machine ethics, machine intelligence, design. So all in on AI, it seems like. Welcome firstly to the podcast, and maybe just how did you get into all of this stuff as a career and so forth?
Thank you, Lewis. Yeah, I have a background in machine vision, which is about teaching computers how to understand things in the world, how visually, in terms of images and videos and things like that, learning to recognize objects and people and scenes, and put together a narrative of what they're watching, etc. And for the longest time, that was an extremely difficult field, because every single thing that you wanted to teach a machine to recognize required an enormous amount of programming. For example, 15 years ago, trying to teach a computer to recognize a bird or to tell apart, a seagull from a finch was enormously challenging. And in the body measurement company that I set up, this machine vision based company that can reconstruct the body in 3D from just normal camera images, so one shot from the front and one shot from the side. We handcrafted all of these very clever algorithms to cut the person out of the background, and every time it would tend to go wrong. And most frustratingly, it worked perfectly about 15% of the time. So we knew that it could work. It's just we couldn't get the reliability. And so I had this team of PhDs working with me to create this custom algorithm. And we'd get the head to fit well, but the crotch would start to break, or one of the arms would fit, but then the feet would go astray. And it just goes to show how very complex things like that are very difficult to make sense out of using rule-based techniques. But that's when, around about 2012, 2013, when we had this revolution in deep learning. And that's about teaching machines not just to find patterns in data, which is what machine learning is about, but teaching machines to find patterns within patterns, to be able to understand and make deep leaps of intuition about things, what they're looking at, and making sophisticated predictions, etc. And so suddenly, by applying just, several hundred photo edited before and after images of what we wanted, basically a silhouette of a person, feeding them into this convolutional neural network, which was, had just been demonstrated to be like this huge leap forward. Suddenly, this thing that we couldn't solve by hand was magically able to be figured out by machines, and it worked flawlessly the first time. And that's when I realized that we were really onto something special, and I became deeply interested in these new forms of machine learning. Since then, of course, we've seen the advent of generative AI and making these systems accessible to everyone through nothing more than natural language, a single sentence,
Yeah.
maybe even something spoken aloud. And very soon also, of course, we're coming to a new wave of AI, which is going to be very special. And that's agentic AI systems.
Which
So
is
far, well, so far we have AI systems that we can kind of, interrogate about something, or, ask them to proofread a document or generate an image or things like that. But they aren't really capable of independent action or making decisions on the fly. And that's what agentic AI is all about. It's having something that's able to express agency. That is, it's able to make sense of a situation and to create a plan of action and to put that plan into motion. And that means that these systems can act at arm's length. We can kind of manage them by objectives, and they can go off and do a mission. We can
could
tell
it be
them to
something
plan.
like, like the Tesla self-driving autonomous cars? Is that a variation of what you're talking about?
To some extent, yes, although those systems are heavily dependent on machine vision because they're using cameras, kind of like the
Oh,
onboard
right, yeah,
cameras for distance
yeah,
sensors and stuff. Whereas other autonomous vehicles use LiDAR, which is like a very expensive and sophisticated laser rangefinder that spins around very quickly. And those cost about $50,000. So, per unit, that's very expensive. But it also means that self-driving vehicles that use these LiDAR systems can basically function perfectly well for city driving or highway driving in most circumstances. Maybe not
right,
in a place like Mumbai yet, but somewhere like San Francisco, no problem. I mean, that's solved in terms of
yeah,
getting around using something like Waymo in San Francisco, no problem. You can, those autonomous machines work very well. The problem with Tesla is that they're using cameras, and that requires an enormous amount of more computing power.
right,
And
right.
so far, that's why Tesla has had issues that other companies like Waymo have not. But certainly, um, cars and even navigation systems that teach you how to get from A to B and to take this road instead of that one because this road is kind of busy, etc. Or to change and get off a train here and jump on a bus there. Those are, in some instances, already kind of agentic style systems. But what we're about to get is ones that we can really talk to and explain our mission and tell it to go and plan an event, and it will look into venues, look into speakers, look into what kinds of things are hot topics, etc., and do all of that for you, and basically present a list and say, hey, do you want me to now contact these people, or negotiate a deal on that venue, etc. And
Yeah.
so it's going to be an enormous game changer. And so
And is that
the
this year, next year? Like, are we kind of is that really imminent?
it is pretty eminent. So already we're starting to see these systems take off. There's things like Open Devon, which provide open source agentic models. And we know that there's a big overhang, as they call it, in AI. An overhang is when we know that there's a whole lot of capabilities that just are,
Oh,
almost ready to be exploited, but haven't been yet, right?
right, right.
And basically, we know that given the current language models and things that we have at the moment, there's so much more that we can do with them with a bit of what's called scaffolding. Scaffolding is basically like little tiny programs that help these things to think in a more cohesive manner. Because we all know that LLMs tend to go off on one, right? They lose track or context of what they're working on. They can, of course, confabulate or hallucinate things that don't exist, make up references or sometimes libelous statements about people. And so by getting these systems to think in a more coherent manner, we can produce outputs that are much more reliable and indeed, of course, greatly improve the agenticness of these systems, their ability to make sense of situations and put a plan into action. And so we're learning that we can marry the kind of dreamy, intuitive capabilities of these language models with a lot of logic, kind of older programming languages from like the 1980s and stuff, like Prolog, which is like a logical language. If we marry that up with an LLM, its ability to do things like mathematical reasoning go through the roof, from say like 5% of questions answered to 80 or 90%.
Wow.
And that means that these agentic systems are going to go from being successful in, say, 20 steps of action towards 200. And that's an enormous difference in how
Yeah.
capable these systems are. And so there's so much waiting in the wings just with the existing technology that we have. It's simply
Yeah.
a matter of plugging it together. And that's why we know that these enormous innovations in AI are going to continue and probably even accelerate beyond what we've seen in the past couple of years. So that's
Love that.
exciting
And
and
how
exhilarating and a little bit frightening too.
and how will that manifest? Will that be through like ChatGPT, Gemini, OpenAI, Grok, Meta, X, like, all of these different. I mean, they're all going to bring stuff out like this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of the big tech companies already have these agentic models, but they're kind of sitting on them at the moment for a number of reasons. First, because they need a lot more testing. The flip side of having something which is so capable in AI is that it can cause a lot more trouble, right? It can waste resources. It can cause embarrassment, potentially. It can get the wrong end of the stick, right? If the event that you're planning is a picnic for a local charity, you want to take stock of whether that's like for the local mosque or synagogue or the local vegan society, because you don't want to be ordering ham sandwiches for everyone, right? You know,
Yeah.
and so understanding people's boundaries and preferences and things like that is super important for these systems, and that's to some degree still largely an unsolved problem. There's a lot more work still needs to be done there,
Yeah.
especially because we're putting these systems in the hands of everyday people and expecting them to be very careful in how they specify a mission so that these systems don't take shortcuts, which technically fulfill the mission, but not in the way that we want, right? The system might decide, giving everyone a shot glass of tap water and a cracker would technically fulfill the brief, so I'm going to go ahead and do that,
Yeah.
right? Because
But that's what
systems
most people. I'd say, just to interrupt, that's probably what most people do. It's like sentence, "Hey, organize me like the best party on the planet ever." It's got to be in London somewhere, and it starts at 8 p.m. or something. Like it's probably people start like that, right? And then it's interesting because a lot of folks I speak with, it's actually like they're at a loss, but it's like, well, what do I input? Like, how do I do it? What do I write? How long? These kind of things are quite interesting.
Indeed, and it does matter. If you take care into how you prompt these systems, you can gain enormously better outputs.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, as we know, sometimes those carefully constructed prompts can get systems to do things that they're not supposed to, right? We can jailbreak these systems to get them to teach us how to do something we shouldn't necessarily be able to know, or get them to solve things like captchas and stuff for us that they're not supposed to, right?
Right.
Major security issues. And then, of course, we've got the issue of open source. So we do know that open source AI technologies are very quickly catching up to the best in class proprietary paid for models. And there's a gap of about 15 to 18 months. So
So
say, for
who does the
example,
open source? Just as Meta do it? Are they who's like
yeah, there are a number of different open source models out there, including the Mistral family.
right? Yeah,
Meta, of course,
that's it.
releases
Yeah,
Llama, and
yeah,
they've
that's
been
it.
releasing those open source, although there's some discussion about whether they'll continue to open source them in the EU because of some of the EU's rules there. But it's actually in Meta's interest to release these systems open source, because the community typically finds ways to optimize these models, basically to get them to do a lot more capabilities with smaller or fewer number of parameters. Basically, something you can run on much more modest hardware. In fact, quite a lot of models you can run simply on a beefy laptop these days, which is really nuts. Like, even if
Yeah,
you're without the internet, you can still have access to this system that can teach you how to do all kinds of things, how to gut a fish, or how to build a cabin. Useful knowledge, especially if somebody's potentially out of communication from the rest of the world. Um, but it's in Meta's interest to release these models open source because the community optimizes them so much. And even if they only save like 10% compute power on the next training run, that still translates into tens of millions of dollars from their
yeah.
perspective. So
Yeah.
that's another
No, it's interesting.
driver of why big companies often are supporting open source.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was listening to I forget his name now. The guy that founded Perplexity.
Hmm.
Do you know the guy who founded what's his name? He was on the Lex Friedman podcast. Anyway, it's interesting. They were talking a little bit about open source and the pros and cons and stuff. Would you mind giving me a little overview of that? Because it's quite interesting in relation to whether it's, you mentioned security, innovation. Like, what are your thoughts on it?
It is a mixed bag. On the good side, it is a powerful tool for democracy because it makes these wonderful capabilities accessible to so many other entities, essentially for free or next to free. It's much better at dealing with things like minority languages. Like, there's hundreds or maybe thousands of languages across Southeast Asia or across Africa, etc. And we don't necessarily have good data sets in which to train algorithms to work with those languages. And that's something that open source can help with. It can help to fill in gaps or to
Right.
meet needs for communities that may not be best served by Silicon Valley kinds of AI models.
Yeah.
What works in Berkeley may not necessarily fit well in Sudan or somewhere like that, right? But if you can create something that's almost as good as the latest proprietary model for next to free, then that can serve that community very nicely. The issue with open source is, of course, that it also puts capabilities in the hands of bad actors, right? We're learning that AI systems can be very powerful in terms of hacking systems because they can look at attack surfaces and understand where systems may be vulnerable. Even more concerningly, they can look at human beings and discern whether somebody might be, they might have a gambling debt, or they might be having a hangover, or maybe they're pregnant and they don't even know that yet, but their employer is able to discern that just by watching them through a CCTV camera connected to an AI system. And so these systems can discern all kinds of things about us, with all our little peccadillos, and that can be used potentially for social engineering attacks, basically to try to get people to do things they otherwise wouldn't be inclined to do,
Yeah.
etc. And so we're seeing, of course, companies being bilked for, $25 million because, uh, the CFO thought that they were talking to the CEO, who was telling them to like wire a bunch of money to some account. And of course, it was deep faked, right? It was a very
Crazy.
plausible
On video. On
communication.
video.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Unbelievable.
You know,
Unbelievable.
And it was so credible that they were just like, sure, let's, go ahead. And so it's, that's why we need to have things like code words and stuff, or safe words, so we always we can always
Yeah,
verify
evolve.
who indeed we're talking to.
Yeah, we need to evolve our security for sure. What's the flip side of that? So, because interestingly, if it's open source, then there's a lot of good folks that might then dive in, find out what the gaps are, and maybe help to improve the security. Well, what are your views on that? Is that
Well, indeed, open source can be good for that. Um, as you say, generally the more eyes that are on something, often problems can be spotted. Although sometimes those eyes may be people not looking to improve the security, but looking for vulnerabilities to exploit potentially.
yeah,
We also see sometimes that open source libraries can have an enormous amount of other programs, dependent on them. And so if there is one little flaw somewhere, as we've seen flaws in, for example, implementations of SSL, like the encryption systems for making sure we can talk privately to each other and things. When there are vulnerabilities like that, they are critical because basically all of the infrastructure on the internet is dependent on those. And suddenly it's wide open for exploitation. You've
yeah,
got to suddenly push an update. And when you have to suddenly push an update, things sometimes tend to go wrong. So
yeah,
there's all kinds of trade-offs always.
yeah. Thank you so much for that. Let's move a little bit into like what this means for work. And I know your book that it's just come out. Your book, right?
That's right. Yes. Taming the
Love it.
Machine, indeed.
Taming the Machine. Read it there. But there's a few topics I want to just draw from that. Maybe to start with, and I've been talking about this for a bit with folks. Is this AI leader? Are we going to be working for an AI? Is AI going to be leading countries? And maybe you can argue they'll do a better job than many leaders who are human, who are currently leading stuff. But where do you sit on all that? And where do you imagine things might be in the near future?
I'm not certain about leaders per se, but in the near to midterm, definitely we will have AI board members in a sense that we will have um, a lot of systems helping us to analyze enormous amounts of data to make sense out of various changes in the market, changes in culture, changes in customer preferences and needs, etc., on a level that's often quite difficult for leaders to do. We all know that sometimes we're working on the business and sometimes we're working in the business, and quite often it's the everyday things that arrest our attention and make it difficult to think in a more abstract, higher level strategic manner. So machines can help to do that, and they can help to spot opportunities. We know that, for example, Warren Buffett famously reads for about 5 or 6 hours a day, cramming his brain full of information so that he can synthesize new insights about what's going on in the world. And that's something, of course, that machines can be very helpful in doing. They can crunch all of these numbers for us. In the longer term, within say 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the emergence of AI-driven corporations. So we're going to see basically
What,
quasi-corporate entities entering the market, and those are going to be disruptive in a lot of sectors.
and when you
So
say AI driven, do you mean like the people making? Well, I say the people. The AI is making some of the key
agents,
decisions. Yeah,
yes, indeed. So these are going to be hybrid organizations, but they're going to be principally AI led, and they're going to hire some human beings to do face-to-face kind of work or physical kind of work, things that robots and such aren't good for. Um, but because these entities are going to be largely constructed out of AI agents working together, they aren't going to have offices and they aren't going to have salaries and things even. And that means that in some industries they're going to be powerfully disruptive because they're going to come in at
yeah,
the bottom level, as disruptive entrants often do, with a product that is inferior but is radically cheaper. And then gradually the quality is going to go up and it's going to press upon some of the incumbent orgs. And so that's going to be something that a lot of
And that'll be
people in industry are going to be blindsided by, because they're going to be
yeah.
thinking about their competitors, right? Pepsi's going to be worrying about Coca-Cola or whatever. They're not going to be worrying about these new AI-driven entrants.
And they'll be created by a human, and then initially, I guess, and then
One presumes.
you know what they
And
say about
well,
assumptions. You never know.
indeed. I mean, potentially these things could be emancipated to some degree. They could have a corporate personhood, and it could be wonderful from a charitable perspective, because a lot of
Yeah.
charities and mutual aid organizations and things like that, credit unions, they do very good things for the world, but there's a large overhead, right? Because of all the people involved. And
Yeah.
if you can strip out that overhead, then you can provide radically cheaper financial services, insurance, and things like that. Really powerful community benefits for very low cost. Another thing that these AI corporations can do is to provide dividends to people. So instead of having to sort of tax and spend to provide welfare, instead we could set up companies, to these virtual AI companies, to provide, useful goods and services for the market, but that the dividends generated by those companies actually could go to people that can use them for things like, ancillary income and things like that.
Yeah. Love that. That's really interesting. So many things you can imagine that they might be very useful for. The other side, which I know you're very interested in, is ethics. And so what's being done to try and make sure, I'd say try and make sure, because it's probably very a grey area, that these AI agents will be making ethical decisions and so forth.
There's a lot of work being done in this space, and which I'm glad, and I'm hoping that it can continue to be well resourced, because it's very important. There have been tremendous advancements in AI ethics, and that's about how we use machines in a way that is fair and less likely to cause trouble. We have new standards and certifications for improving the transparency of systems, so we know what they're doing for whose benefit, in what manner. And that can help us to understand what kinds of potential biases these systems may have, or to understand if things have gone wrong and how to prevent that in future, improving the accountability of these systems. And
Yeah.
we've seen with examples such as the Horizon Post Office scandal, which was, of course, a very simple system by modern standards, and one that's actually quite easy to audit if you wanted to properly audit it. We've seen how disruptive that has been, how it's sent, dozens of people wrongfully to jail, with hundreds of unsafe convictions, etc. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we haven't really learned those lessons, because over in Denmark, in Australia with the Robodebt scandal, in the Netherlands with the child benefit scandal, in Michigan with their unemployment benefit scandal, we keep having the same kinds of issues, of systems being given too much trust and too little oversight, and they can
Right.
indeed, cause enormous problems for people down the line.
Well, it's quite easy to, and with the Horizon ones, interesting. It's like the system can't be wrong. It's way more likely the human's wrong, right? And so you kind of go down that path, and as a human, and if you actually are right, it's really difficult, I think, at that point to come back from
It
that.
is. Yeah, there's a lot of tendency towards automation bias, and that's about basically treating the machine as like, it knows what it's doing. Like it's right 95% of the time.
Yeah.
So it's always right, right?
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
forget
Yeah.
that one time in 20, it's going to get the wrong end of the stick. And, if that system is involved in judicial processes or healthcare or employment, or who even gets an interview in the first place, and maybe because, they went to Scunthorpe College and Scunthorpe has a naughty word buried in it. Oh, like that resume, goes straight to the waste paper basket, right?
But that's already, I mean,
So,
we're already seeing that. We're already
yeah,
seeing, certainly for kind of like, let's say, like bulk hiring, let's say, junior, mid-level, seasonal hiring, et cetera, where you apply and it's through the AI. And then if you're going to hit the right keywords, et cetera, then maybe you get sent a video interview and they're looking at your your body language, direction of your eyes, all this stuff, and they'll come up with a personality profile. Then maybe you get to a human. So you kind of have that. I mean, you have that anyway. It's really interesting. What I find really, really quite interesting to imagine is if you 5-10 years time and you're applying for a job, your line manager is an AI agent, and what that means for all of these different things that people are talking around. I mean, anything, burnout, mental health, development, all of these kinds of things, and then also who's training the AI, right? And I think it might be interesting to see. You'll have I guess you'll have different AI with different biases and different tendencies depending on who's trained them and what they've been trained on. Maybe the environment that they're in as well. I mean, so would you think we'll end up with, even like we have now, you have like, I know, good leaders and bad leaders, right? Just kind of like, 1 and 0. But do you think you'll end up with something similar? Be like, don't want to go work for that AI leader. They're a nightmare. Go and work for that one. They're way nicer. Do you think we'll end up with something like that too?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, I've got a chapter on this in my book called Taskmasters, and it's all about these forms of algorithmic management. And, you know, that they could be used in a good way. They could help to identify opportunities to provide coaching or support for people, etc. But we have seen that there's a tendency to use these systems to micromanage people through sort of modern kind of scientific management or Taylorism, which doesn't always end up working well in a sustainable form for people. It can lead to burnout. Your line manager or middle manager might, excuse an occasional, absence or lateness into work of, somebody's off form that day or something, if they know that that person has generally got their heart in the right place. But systems may not be so forgiving or understanding. They may set people's hours at ridiculous forms. And we all know that there's nightmare bosses out there. And of course, that people leave bosses, they don't leave companies fundamentally,
Yes.
right? And sometimes for the same reason, they stay in companies because they have, a great camaraderie and respect for the management, even if other perks may not be necessarily there.
Yeah.
And, there is a danger that it's not so much that robots will take our jobs, but that we will be potentially obliged to work like robots, right? And
Interesting
that there will be
perspective. Yeah.
And that, autonomous machines may erode and usurp human autonomy by taking a lot of our decisions and our ability to express initiative out of our hands, right? By constantly kind of saying, okay, work on this task, now work on this, work on that,
But then almost though it's flipping the roles, right? Because you look at how certainly how AI is like kind of being used right now in relation to like how has my job got more efficient by using AI in the last 6 months, 12 months, and it's actually by automating some of that, the data analysis, transcribing calls, writing notes, but very basic stuff. And so actually what you're talking about is maybe that actually might kind of flip, because I think at the moment it's, we as humans get to be creative, and we're thinking about it, and we're like, well, how creative can we be on the input to the AI for Gemini or for ChatGPT? And so do you think it will actually maybe shift?
I do think that the space between human and machine cognition can lead to interesting insights that otherwise would not happen alone.
Good answer.
So we've seen, for example, with AlphaGo, the Go playing system by DeepMind, how the system came up with this very interesting move that that people couldn't make sense of, and people thought, oh, it's gone off on one, like it's gone nuts. And then suddenly it showed that this move was actually incredibly valuable, incredibly intelligent, and nobody had seen anything like that before. And everybody was like, this machine is incredible. But it was up against Lee Sedol, pretty much one of the best players out there in the world. And Lee, having basically been inspired by the machine, came back, a few moves later with his Hand of God move,
Right,
again
right.
displaying a level of competence and human genius that had never been seen before.
Yeah.
And so the sort of dyad between humans and machines can lead to things being developed that otherwise would not happen with either of them alone. And I think that shows that,
So,
on the one hand, machines can kind of erode our capabilities or oblige us to be lazy, phone things in with sort of general acceptable pablum, but nothing inspiring. But at the same time, if we do things carefully, machines can lead us into very interesting places that otherwise we couldn't reach.
yeah, we end up in a. If you read Yuval Harari's book, Homo Deus, Human Gods, I mean, have you seen? So the kind of like premise of that is that the next evolution for us, integrating with AI, and that's just the next evolution of humanity, so to speak.
I think that's what we're gonna have increasingly. In the next few years, we're gonna move from we're gonna have AirPods basically that have cameras on them and that are able to look out into the world and whisper in our ear, like Cyrano de Bergerac, close the deal, or I think that person's lying, or like
Yeah, yeah.
watch out for that manhole cover, um, and we're going to be constantly wired into this sort of third hemisphere that's
I mean,
thinking for us.
arguably, look, I mean, this has been by my side for years, so I mean, I'm kind of we're arguably kind of. It's interesting. I mean, I think with the camera stuff as well. I mean, because there will be there will be caution around. I don't want the camera always on. I don't want it to look at me all the time. Um, so I think that'll be interesting because already a lot of people are talking about some people have the little privacy thing on the camera. If your manager's an AI and they're like, you've got to keep your camera on. Very
Yeah,
interesting to see it.
and that does lead to burnout in many people. Like having to sit with a camera on in a meeting where you're not actively doing anything, but you're obliged to sort of like show up and be like, yeah, I'm sitting here. Look, that can be excruciating for a lot of people.
It
Because it
can be.
takes
It
so
can
much
be.
social energy, even more
Yeah.
than like a one-to-one conversation.
Yeah, yeah. But you also have this, ASMR. People
Mm.
like to hear, feel, and some. So you've got this genre, growing genre, which is business ASMR, which people just like to watch people working. And you just
Oh yeah.
stick a camera somewhere, and you just tune in, and you're just watching someone type and work
Yeah.
and whatever. And so you can imagine that might end up being just hey, come work for us. You've got to keep the camera on, and just so we can see, and that'll be
Yeah.
a bit be interesting to see that. I think it'll be a bit of a backlash. But how do you think then? Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just saying, yes, and this is especially the case when so many people are doing remote work.
Yeah,
And sometimes bosses are obliging cameras and microphones to be turned on, even in domestic environments, which is, of course, quite a violation of people's privacy. Sometimes workers have been on their lunch break and they've decided, to play some games and stuff like that. And some AI system has heard blips and bloops or whatever, and they're on their lunch break. But the company says, well, that's for eating food. It's not for playing video games. And that's very it's very dystopian to have these systems snooping and snitching on people when just trying to live their life and and do their job as well, but in good faith.
yeah. But look, I think it'll be interesting to see like what new jobs will be created and how valuable humans are ultimately.
Hmm.
Because right now you can choose, right? Like people can choose if you're in an industry where you are in demand, where there's many more jobs than there are people, then you have some choice and some power around who you choose to work with or who you choose to work for and all of this stuff. And so depending on what jobs are created, humans can still choose. And if people don't like that environment, they'll choose not to go there or they'll choose to leave if there's other options available. If we get to a point where we're a bit of a commodity, you kind of take what you're given, right? Because hey, there's nothing else around, and you need to earn money, then then maybe
Indeed.
that this kind of stuff will be more powerful.
I've concerns that it will be, especially because we seem to be headed for a major recession, possibly a sort of 2008 style crisis again, unfortunately. And of course, that's going to put even more pressure on people to find work and to bring home the bacon. And we're already in a time where recruitment is so AI driven, where there's all these AI interviews and things that generate metrics about people, many of which are probably nonsense, or are not germane to whether somebody can actually do a job. And perhaps, it's a good thing to have a range of personalities in a team. Otherwise, you end up in groupthink and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of pitfalls in overuse of AI in recruitment, and also, of course, in screening resumes and stuff. There's a lot of good quality candidates that are thrown out because the system simply can't read their resume properly, or those sorts of things. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we use these systems effectively.
Yeah. So on that, and so there's been a few. So on the ethics, particularly, which I'm quite interested in, given every single country and companies all over the world are trying to develop these things, how valuable do you think it is for, say, a country like the UK to regulate it?
On the one hand, regulation can potentially scupper innovation because it can kind of preclude certain lines of development which might be interesting in future, unless that legislation is carefully written. However, quite often it's regulation that actually enables sectors because companies are aware that they may have lawsuits, etc., in future, especially in, say, common law systems where a single precedent can actually change the interpretation of an existing system and put it in another category, for example.
Yeah.
Or risk categories could change based on some jurisdiction tightening the nuts to some degree. So it's important to have good regulation because it's an enabler of companies actually being able to go ahead and use AI in a safe way without incurring major liability. So no regulation is perhaps even worse than slightly too draconian regulation in many instances.
Interesting. But then we'll end up with a variety across the world, right? Some countries will, some countries won't. I mean, you'll
Yeah.
end up.
So far, there's been general concordance actually between the EU and US, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I was expecting a bit more diversification there, but so far it's been reasonably compatible, I think. And the Brussels effect is, of course, very strong. The EU regime will have a lot of impact all across the world. And I think we'll also see middle powers like Singapore, etc., kind of come together with other countries like Mexico maybe, and create their own way of making sense of these things. So hopefully we will see general agreement amongst many jurisdictions, and that will reduce the risk of flags of convenience and somebody using sort of Panama or Liberia as they're used in shipping, to skirt regulations. We don't want to see something like that for cyber companies as well.
True. Maybe we can end on what this means for the individual. So someone watching this, and they're whatever stage of their career they're at, it can be quite daunting. Can't it? Oh my God, my job might not exist, or what should I focus on doing? Like, what should I develop to make sure I'm relevant for the next 5 years, 10 years, even like, oh my God, what's my kid going to do? But there's some things that you think just these are like the few things that you should be working on and developing to make sure you stay relevant.
Yeah. I mean, the most important skills of the 21st century are going to be the ability to collaborate with other people and to apply empathy, to understand very complex situations and to solve problems within those. And most importantly, perhaps to keep learning as an adult. There's been an assumption that you go to school, maybe you go to college, and you learn something, and hopefully you end up applying that in your actual career. Many people don't, right? They end up going into a completely different field.
Like me.
But it's very
Yeah.
important that we keep learning, because the world is changing so quickly, and to a large extent, knowledge is becoming cheap, right? Because language models can teach us anything that we need to know, and soon they're going to get much more reliable and trustworthy, etc. And their ability to make sense of situations and to report on things is going to be much stronger, and that's going to it's going to put more pressure on knowledge and reduce its value. And so being able to learn things quickly, which is difficult as an adult, is going to be very important. As an adult, we tend to realize as an amateur how much we suck, how bad our skills are, how little our knowledge is, and that can be very disheartening. A child doesn't know how bad they are when they're picking up the violin, right? But so they just keep playing, and eventually they become quite good, right? And so being able to continue to keep learning and to get over the stumbling block of knowing that we're not quite good yet is, as an adult, a superpower, right?
Massive superpower. It's just
Massive superpower. Yeah. And another really important skill is going to be curation and tastefulness. Because machines are going to be able to create things very easily, but deciding what fits or what version of a potential document or new thing is a best fit is going to be something still in human hands, and where humans have a lot of value to add. So becoming a good curator and tastemaker is going to be very important in the years to come.
Love that. I agree. I think I kind of like summarize it as human skills. I think they're really, really important. Be it building, making friendships, empathy, the creativity. Those kind of things I think quadruple down on, and that will set you apart. The other thing, just wanted to pull that thread of information, and almost I think when I was growing up, I could genuinely believe what I'm looking at is true. Like I'll watch the news, maybe two people talking, pretty much, almost I'd say 100% certain that they were actually talking in that room about what they were talking about. Now you have no idea whether they're actually talking to each other or what they're saying is what they said. So I think there's that. The other thing is, and with social media and all these let's call them micro journalists, everyone reporting and this kind of stuff. We have so much more availability of information, but I think for me, your ability to interpret it and look at different sources and think about what is actually real and true, and being widely read or listening to, or what I think is going to be really important, because you can end up having a view of the world which is different, completely different to what's real. And I think that's going to be important, and that's what I'm working a lot on, actually.
Nice. Well, that's very important work, and thank you for working on that. It's so clear that we need to have much stronger epistemic grounding as a society. Otherwise, we can get swept away in a torrent of nonsense.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I'm going to mention this Perplexity again. I don't know if have you ever used it. It's a really nice. Sure. So I quite like this because it's kind of like a search AI tool where it's kind of built like a science paper, where if you search for something, it will bring back the information, and then it will cite all the different sources and links and so forth that it's pulled the info from, and then suggest questions, maybe follow-up questions you might want to ask, which you hadn't thought of. Anyway, I quite like it because it's quite nice to do. It's a little kind of change from Google, where maybe whoever's paid the most, their results will come up first. So anyway, there's some really interesting stuff around, and I do like trying new things, but I think this where you get your information from is really, really important. and there's just so many. It's a minefield right now, I think.
Agreed. Absolutely. Hopefully
Love it. Thank you
machines can
so
help us to tease out the nonsense and find the jewels mixed in with it.
Hopefully, but then also to kind of, I guess, there's also still a variation on who's developed that particular model, what it's trained on. So I think there'll still be quite a lot of, so even like now, I mean, I think there's probably, if you're trying and using, well, it's ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, whatever, you'll get different results and a slightly different like perspective on the answer. So yeah, it's interesting. What is your last one? What's your kind of go-to AI tool?
I do like Claude. I think Claude, the latest version of Claude, has a very nice way of framing things. I like how it kind of puts things in a literary manner sometimes. So it's a beautiful way of working with language, I think. Yeah. I do like also how ChatGPT can work with the internet and look up things live, which is something Claude isn't so good at yet.
Right.
So kind of a toss up between those two for me. But I do also like
Right.
Perplexity and its ability to
You do.
search out and to syncretize new information, sometimes leading to things that we don't even know the word that we're looking for,
Yeah.
which is really
Yeah.
special.
Yeah, I love that. Nell, thank you so much. Really nice to speak with you.
Thank you.
I suppose you can you find your book on Amazon and all the various different places.
Absolutely. Yeah, Taming the Machine kind of distills a lot of the things that we've talked about today. And I've tried to make it as accessible as possible to provide a strong overview of both AI ethics and AI safety in one living companion that one can dip into at any time.
I love it. I love
Thank you
it.
so much for this conversation, Lewis.
Pleasure. Really nice to speak to you. And hopefully we'll speak again very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
Bye for
you.
now.
See ya. Bye.